I declare the meeting open at 5:30. I welcome councillors and management and members of the public in attendance to the City of Melbourne. I request that all mobile phones be turned off for the duration of the meeting. The next item is general business, and it's 7.1, a notice of motion, Councillor Mayne, funding the Queen Victoria Market Renewal Project. I call on Councillor Mayne to move the motion.
Thank you, Acting Lord Mayor. I'd like to move the slightly amended motion appearing on the screen.
I call on a councillor to second that motion. Councillor Wood. Councillor Mayne.
Thank you, Acting Lord Mayor. I'll briefly go through the amendments as opposed to what has appeared in the notice of meeting. We've removed the old point 2, which had a reference to the circa $5 million of total earnings that we receive each year from QVM. We've removed the idea that the 2014-15 earnings that we receive go into the proposed fund. We've also changed the starting date from the 1st of July 2014 to simply the first quarter of 2014-15. We'll give officers a little bit more time to establish the fund, and the first contribution to that will be of the 2013-14 underlying surplus that will be generated. So I guess more broadly, the purpose of the fund, I guess we've made a number of media and press statements about the biggest project in the City of Melbourne's history and spending up to $250 million on it. And when you talk about spending up to $250 million when your annual capital works budget is about $100 million, you realise how big an undertaking this will be. Now, hopefully we will deliver the project without reaching that absolute upper limit of $250 million, and this motion is designed to kick along the first steps, or some initial steps in terms of showing our determination to actually get the project financed. So we establish a fund. We've released the plans recently in the last couple of weeks, which show that the funding of the project will partly come from the sale of 2 development sites on the southern boundary. So in point 3, we are proposing to sell off a small proportion of I think what is an 18-acre site, and any proceeds we get from that, and it's likely to be in the tens of millions, but any proceeds we get from that will be deposited into the fund and reinvested in the Queen Victoria Market. Point 4, we're also looking at any asset sales or land sales of redundant land, so little easements or strips that pop up from time to time. If there are any of those going forward, commencing next financial year, they will also be deposited. And it's important to note that we don't have a large budgeted number for those sales. So we don't have a policy to pursue those sales, but on average, over the last few years, we've had a little over $1 million a year on average from those little strips and those little redundant pieces of land that are occasionally sold off. And I think importantly as well, the other major change is in point 5, where we initially were talking about authorising the officers to look at participating in the forthcoming Municipal Association of Victoria inaugural council bond. And there's a proposal to issue hopefully a $150 million bond where well over 10 of Victoria's 79 councils will contribute to that, to get that up to a critical mass, and we will have an example of good aggregated procurement by the sector where you get cheaper debt if you all go together. So we don't need to borrow any money now, but when we get into the heavy lifting of this project, we may well need to go to the bond market. So the idea is that our officers will prepare a report to come back to us before June 30 to look at whether we should participate in that first bond later this calendar year for as little as $1 million or up to $10 million, and if the economics work, then we may actually do that to help seed this fund. And also point 6 is the CEO writing to the state government about the congestion tax. Now, this hasn't really been acknowledged as to how big a hit this is on the QVM, but it's going to be close to $1 million in tax from this congestion tax that QVM will be paying the state government from the beginning of next year. That's about 20% of their profit. So the $5 million a year we've been making, all of a sudden $1 million of that will go to the car park tax, if you like, the so-called congestion levy. And we won't be given any of that, so we won't get any share of that to come into sustainable transport investment, as has occurred with other parts of the municipality where the tax has been applied on private car parks. So we're basically saying that if the government's going to slug us $1 million a year, we'd like them to reinvest the first 5 years of that into our fund, acknowledging how big a job this is and helping us get the project done. And finally, point 7, which has been a good suggestion from Councillor Leppert, is that we also note that we'll be hearing back from the officers in November this year, following a vote at the Future Melbourne Committee in February this year, outlining a more comprehensive program and plan in terms of how we get the funding. So this to deliver the overall project. So this starts the process of putting some money aside. It won't put nearly enough aside, so we'll have to make some substantial allocations from our capital works budget for a number of years to actually deliver the project, and there may well be some debt as well. But this motion tonight sort of provides some council grunt supporting the media statements that we've been making about delivering the biggest project in the history of the City of Melbourne.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wood, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Acting Lord Mayor. I think the intent of this the initial motion was good, but I think Councillor Mayne's very eager to get stuck into this when it is a long-term project, and he's acknowledged that in the chat that we've all had, and I think that this motion, as it's put now, is a good one. I think that, you know, we're talking in a project that's in the order of sort of 3 or 4 times the capital projects, the size of a single capital project that we've implemented previously as a council. So I do agree with Councillor Mayne that you know, $1 today is certainly worth more than $1 tomorrow. So starting this process now is a good one. I think that some good moves on this motion were to sort of avoid the impacts on our current budgetary process, which is an involved and rigorous process in itself, and that this motion now takes us away from impacting potentially on other capital works. I think the other thing too is that point 7 does rightly state that we are seeking management and officers to come back to us with a suggested way forward in terms of actually how we fund this. But Councillor Mayne's motion does start to show that we're very serious about this project. I don't think that was ever doubted. Certainly the Lord Mayor, this has been a project that he's wanted to see through for a very long time, as have many officers. But I think this is a good step in the right direction, particularly with establishing the fund to show that we're serious about funding what's going to be an excellent renewal project, not just for the city, but indeed for North Melbourne, and I know that many retailers around the North Melbourne area are crying out for this project to really inject even more life into what is an excellent precinct.
Thank you. Is there any other speaker to the motion? Councillor Leppert.
Thank you, Acting Lord Mayor. I will support this motion. Just picking up on what the mover has said, this motion puts some council grunt behind media statements. Well, I think that's probably a good place to start and explains why I'm quite nervous about at least the original notice of motion, which I certainly couldn't have supported. The media statements are one thing, but they follow a decision of council in February to decide what the governance framework for the QVM renewal project would be and what the timeline associated with that would be. So yes, whilst there have been media comments in recent weeks, it doesn't necessarily follow that we have to follow that up with a quite rushed statement of policy intent. And so I think what we've got before us today is something that we can all probably agree with. I don't want to put words in other councillors' mouth, but I'm assuming that this is going to be unanimously supported, and it has been a bit more of a consensus-driven debate. But what we started with is something that is quite rushed. So we're no longer looking at a fund being established by the 1st of July, which is a good thing because that would not have been manageable. But I think we can all agree that there were some very good ideas put forward in the notice, and the establishment of a fund which can have built around it this idea that we need to fill it. You know, this is a good story to tell if you're wanting to raise funds for the project. I'm sure we can all agree with that, and some of the mechanisms proposed to do that I actually agree with. I just don't think we can all do it in too fast a timeline. So in February we did agree to the governance framework, which is that the QVM Renewal Project Steering Group would propose the budget and the funding plan through the QVM Project Renewal Advisory Committee to Council, and the QVM Project Advisory Committee would consider that and then recommend it to Council. And then that the timeline that we endorsed said that that would come back to us in November 2014. And so we're circumventing that slightly, which is why I'm grateful to Councillor Mayne for including my suggestion of Part 7 here. I hope that the readers of the minutes and the listeners of the debate are aware that this isn't an intention to abandon the governance process that we set up not 2 months ago, but it is a way to put some grunt, I think is the word that's used, and I'm very happy to support that, behind this idea that if we are going to do this project, which the Council is committed to, then we need to show that we're serious and to start that process right now. So with those nervousnesses aside, I think I can support the motion that's before us, but the highest risk of this whole project going wrong, I think, is all to do with the consultation aspects. And we've only just started phase 2, and there are going to be 3 phases of the QVM Renewal Project community consultation. It's a strange time to be putting something like this up when stage 2 of the consultation has only just begun, and we haven't got anywhere near to determining what the scope of the project would be. And the motion talks about things like selling off development sites on the southern boundary of the market. Yes, that's the idea that's been put out for consultation in phase 2, but that is not necessarily what the detail of phase 3 is going to be, or what the final proposal put to council in phase 3 is going to be. So I get nervous, and certainly councillors have had correspondence on this issue. I am nervous that this gives the impression that the consultation process is less than robust because we're all sort of working in one particular direction anyway. So I want to I'm not doing this to slap down the mirror or anything, but I just want to make sure that the listeners to the debate and the readers of the minutes are aware that there's a bigger governance project, a governance process in place here, and that this motion, certainly from my perspective, isn't an attempt to circumvent the next 2 phases of consultation which are currently underway, because, of course, predictability and consistency are just as important as the other aspects of good decision-making, and I do get worried when we've made a decision not 2 months ago that we look a little bit inconsistent here. But I have participated in getting this to a position that I can agree to, and I thank the mover for raising some excellent ideas and for incorporating particularly Part 7, which is important, and on that basis I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other speaker to the motion? Councillor Beverley Pinder-Mortimer.
I'd just like to say, Acting Lord Mayor, that I'd like to commend Councillor Mayne on what I believe are a series of visionary thoughts on this in establishing a renewal fund, albeit a small one in the early stage. I think it will help the city's commitment with what will be the biggest capital project in the city's history. So I think it's a win-win.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Acting Lord Mayor. Look, I agree that that this motion is what is fast amounting to a very good and strong cornerstone for what is certainly the council's largest project and arguably its most significant project. I do share some concerns, however, in relation to consultation on a project of this scale. I'll share the thoughts of my colleagues on that. Look, it's good to see, however, in phase 1 and 2 of the consultation process so far, we do have consultation with disability advocacy groups, heritage groups, although it is by invitation only, traders, and of course there's a walk-up hub and website feedback available for people to contribute their thoughts on a project of such significance. However, I think we can work closely, well, I know we can work closely with officers over coming weeks and months to refine our thoughts in relation to what is appropriate consultation, and hopefully get some more widespread and well advertised submission processes in place, and have residents groups and perhaps industry bodies such as tourism organisations as well included in that process. Of course, that is this is a statement that should probably have included the words "including but not limited to." So I welcome the thoughts of our residents, our visitors, and our business groups, and of course councillors and council officers to progress an appropriate and adequate consultation process as we move through this important project.
Are there any other speakers to the motion? Councillor Watts.
I'm very pleased to support the motion, but I share the concerns some of my colleagues have already expressed. There is community concern about the way in which this plan, this very big project, is being played out, and we really have to remind the community, as well as ourselves, that we don't know yet quite what's going to happen there. Everything that the media has put out, all of that which has been discussed so far, is interim or draft or ideas. I would be unhappy if our devoting this very important first step, gathering the funds together, is misconstrued as any kind of fixed point in the planning that we have reached. This is about the funding. This is not about what should happen. I'm very much an advocate of listening to those who know better than we do what is required very often. So I commend Councillor Mayne for commencing this process, but I am concerned, and will be, no doubt other colleagues too, will be monitoring closely what's going on.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Is there any other speaker? Councillor Roque.
Thank you, Acting Lord Mayor. I think my comments neatly follow on from Councillor Watts' comments and concerns, especially around the implication that this might give, that we're, especially at items number 3, when it talks about selling off of assets, and that the only reason I can support the inclusion of number 3, which isn't on the screen at the moment, is the word any. Sale rather than the sale of these assets, because I couldn't support that, because it does imply that that's actually what we're going to do, and it's not necessarily what we're going to do, and that's an important point to me. I had a meeting today with a group that are incredibly important to the market, and one that hasn't been mentioned at all tonight and isn't actually mentioned in any of our materials. It's loosely mentioned in one word, but the customers, and they're not visitors. There are people that have been buying their weekly produce, weekly shopping at the market every week for 20, 30, 40 years. And they've followed on family tradition for doing so, and we don't talk about the customers, and they actually have a very strong voice, and they're gathering, and they've got many Facebooks and websites, all about saving their Queen Victoria market, and they are concerned that it does seem that this process is already completed, that the plans that have been put out in the media and talked about in the media are the final plans. And so my concern about this resolution coming up tonight was about continuing that impression that people have, and it's important to me that we do have a genuine consultation process, that we do listen to all voices, that the customers that have stuck by this market for many, many years are genuinely listened to, and that when we say that we're consulting, we genuinely are.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speaker to the motion? Any speaker against the motion? I will now put that motion to the right of reply.
Thanks, Acting Lord Mayor. Look, just briefly in response, this motion in no way seeks to endorse any plans. And I think that we are able to consult without having a firm plan, and simultaneously prepare the financing. As Chair of Finance, I was very nervous about going into the second budget of this council and not having a meaningful statement in the second budget about how we're going to fund QVM. And I think that people would rightly say, so you've announced a $250 million project, what can you point me to in your budget that shows you're actually getting ready for this? And I think that this motion, I guess to a degree, partially preempts the budget and actually initiates some financing mechanisms and explorations. And I think that in terms of the consultation, probably the most important thing that we have finally done, and it did take a long time to get to this point, is we've released some concept plans, some drawings that people can respond to. And that only happened a couple of weeks ago, and I think now we have an excellent basis on which to have a discussion, and there will be many changes. But I'm not really aware that there's a plan here or an option to do nothing, to leave the QVM entirely as it is. My sense is that everyone can see that it's a long overdue renewal, and that we are proposing to spend tens of millions of dollars preserving the heritage and keeping the QVM forever, as our material quite openly says in very large print. And if we want to spend tens of millions of dollars preserving QVM forever, we need to be credible in showing that it's not just a big plan, we actually have some financing to do it. Because there's many politicians everywhere who announce great dreams, but then fall over and don't deliver because they haven't actually planned and prepared and put money aside to deliver on their grand aspirations. And when you talk about $250 million and you talk about the biggest project in the City of Melbourne's history, I feel we need to put some real financial grunt behind that. And this is a very small step, because I think it will quickly become apparent that there's a dwarfing gap between the amount of money in our fund and the real cost of the project. And that's when the real discussion will begin, where politicians, the hardest thing we have to do is allocating scarce capital to competing desires or competing aspirations. And this will be our biggest call on scarce capital, and other projects will be competing, and we will have to make those decisions. And I think starting off with a fund does show that we're serious about following through, and it's not going to be what's happened many times before, where councillors in this chamber have talked about their plans and then nothing has happened.
I would now like to put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That has been carried unanimously. That concludes the items of general business to be considered in the open session.